I want to talk a little bit before I go to any scriptures. I've been three or four different spots, but if you're going to title it, what I sent Ron back earlier the week was contentment, and or actually contentment, and discouragement and defeat. And naturally, I got a few scriptures. The ones I'm going to read is going to be common, or most of you will remember them. But the being content and discouraged. If you look contentment up in Webster, I googled one day up at work. I don't even know if it was Webster or which dictionary it was, but the world's definition of it is happiness, or to be happy with. And that's kind of false, because we can be content in a situation but still not be happy with what's going on. I mean, it's like the difference between happiness and joy. A lot of people associate happiness with joy, and they're completely different, actually. It's kind of like the way that I missed the lesson, but I'm sure I know what Ron taught about, like the word hope. The world uses it as most of the time it's not a solid word. If you hear somebody say, "Well, I hope so," it means they got their fingers crossed and they're wishing that it does. And right, and it actually is a solid, foundational word that means to confidently wait on something. So actually, when you say that you're hoping something's going to happen, I mean, you got your confidence and faith that it is. But if you look it up in Strong's, it comes from a couple of different words, but there's two different words, but the one in Philippians 4:11, one of the places I'm going to read, it was a different word, but it also back up if you keep reading your definitions, and it comes from the same root word that the other ones did. But self-complacent, primary verb, it has the ideal of raising a barrier to ward off, to avail, and then enough, suffice, to be sufficient. And the going back to that, and it having the ideal of raising a barrier, or to ward off, or to avail. The contentment and satisfaction both in our life is key for us for success. And it don't matter, I'm going to give a bunch of silly examples here, but if you want a new vehicle, and you may not be nothing wrong with getting a new vehicle, I'm not saying that, but just using an example. If you see somebody got one or whatever, and you look and you say, "Boy, that's pretty, that's nice, I'd like to have one. Well, we'll start letting our wants get in our way. The next thing you know, when we get in our old vehicle, well, this thing's making a noise. Well, it's not driving just right, we stop being content with it. When we start wanting something else, we start being dissatisfied, and we start looking for problems with what we do have. And then we use that for excuse to justify our actions about what we're doing, whether it's a vehicle, clothes, jobs, whatever part. That's like me down in Paducah. I whined and complained. I thank the Lord for the job, but for the first month and a half I was down there, I wasn't content at all. I murmured and whined and complained, and it finally hit me down there. And once it finally clicked, and I got my contentment, I still wanted to be home. It wasn't like that I was the happiest person in the world to be there, but I was still content. I was satisfied. I was pleased with what I had. Once that I reached that spot, my job got better to start with. I started enjoying it more. But then shortly after that, the Lord blessed me to be able to come home. It's the same thing we tell our kids a lot of times. What I tell Haley all the time, she's a little bit wilder than Hayden was. Hayden was a whole lot calmer and wasn't that high strung. He got kind of rough on his toys, but what do you usually tell your kids if they start breaking things? Well, you break it, you're not getting any more. and they just constantly want more and more. And some of that they may pick up off our life, how we're living. How they see mom and dad act. And, it don't matter if you're into sports, and you got a favorite basketball, and then they come out with a new brand, a new edition, it's got some other ball player's name on it or whatever. I need one of them, I need one of them. Next thing you know, well, this ball, I don't like it, it don't shoot that good, it's old, it's getting dry rotted, it don't, but that's how our mind works, and once that we cross that line, then this discouragement comes. And you can relate it right on down to sickness and stuff like that. I don't know nobody that was actually happy to be sick, especially if they're going through cancer or some kind of terminal disease or something that is out of your control. There's no way that the human mind can process it, and anybody just jump up and say, well, I'm happy that this happened, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to be going through this. But on the other hand, you can be content that God has got your back, that he's going to see you through it one way or another. And that's what I wanted to just kind of talk about this and set the stage before I flipped in there and read the scripture on it, though. The word discouraged, I figured out, is only used one time in the New Testament. And it's in Colossians chapter 3, verse 21, where it tells fathers not to provoke their children to anger, lest they be discouraged. And that was surprising. I figured the word discouraged showed up more in the Bible than that. But the word discouraged means to be spiritless, to be dismayed, or it don't say discontented. I keep wanting to say discontented there. I can't even read my own writing. To be disheartened. All three of them go together. Our contentment is first, because when we start losing it, whatever situation it is, and it may be at work with coworkers, I'm thankful for the job I got, but this past week or so it's been real hot, and you start working 60, 80 hours, stuff starts breaking down, and it's easy to get swamped, and you start getting burdened down instead of taking a day off. Next thing you're doing, you're griping and complaining about the job that you just thank God for giving you. And once that contentment's gone, then you start getting discouraged. There's 17 pieces of equipment up there, and all of it's heavy, big equipment. The smallest thing I got up there is a D6 dozer, and most everything is D8, 2 D9s, and big rock trucks. It's heavy iron, a lot of work. And there's some days that when you pull in, you can get one thing going, and there'll be 4 things come at you broke down. And a lot of times it may be simple, it may just be a hose or an O-ring, but if I'm done aggravated with the job to start with, I've been complaining about the hour-and-a-half drive to Hurricane every day. If I get up there with the attitude of, man, I hate this, I'm tired of this drive, then the first thing breaks down comes to me, then I'm mad. Then the next one comes to you and breaks down. Then I'm discouraged, and and then you end up living a defeated life. It all falls together, and it all started from just being content. That's the part of that, having the meaning of raising a barrier to ward off. Our contentment blocks out a lot of stuff that we won't let in. I don't know if I can ever get it across the way the picture in my mind was when I first read that definition, but if you're content, and like I said, that don't mean happy, but if you're satisfied with where you're at, content in your situation, something breaks down and it comes to you, and Brother Mark, my boss, that I request prayer for sometimes, I don't know, I guess the Lord got his way of calming me down, because about the time I feel like I really start getting aggravated, he'll call out of the blue. How you doing? You doing all right? Don't let them boys get to you up there. I know what it is. Don't let them stress you out. Don't let it, just work your own pace. Last week, it wasn't him, but his wife, it was Margaret. They're both Christian. She just sent a little text and said, Greg, I appreciate you very much, and had a little smiley face beside it when she got her paperwork. Just that little bit there was enough to reset me in my way of thinking, well, now that's the owners, that's the bosses, they're happy. I can't help it what everybody else is complaining and griping about, and it lets you shut it off. But it really, to get to the state that I'm going to read about that Paul was talking about here, just like Peter and them when they got beat, and they was, got beat, locked up, and was singing praises at midnight when their shackles fell off. That's what I'm shooting for with this contentment here. It wasn't like that their body didn't hurt. It wasn't like that they was necessarily happy that all of that happened, but they was content to know that they was serving the Lord. It's just like true joy. It comes from the Lord, and He's the only one can give it. And the peace and contentment in our life is the same way. I mean, He's the only place that we'll be able to go to find that contentment, especially in times of trouble and trials and storms. But the being content, it is a barrier itself. I mean, it blocks off a lot of negative thoughts. Because we're human, we got racing minds. It ain't like that every thought we have all day long was pure and innocent and perfect. I mean, no matter if it's road rage. And you've talked about that some, and I've found myself more and more just getting aggravated at people.
You ain't done like that.
I would say West Virginian, but I don't know if you're from West Virginia or not. It wouldn't have worked. I wouldn't have been no gouged on her. But what was lane drives up. I mean, he knows what it is. You can be pretty peaceful going up 64 until you get to exit 1 there at Canova, and then from there to exit 6, you think, boy, this is bad. And then from 6 to 15, you're like, golly, I should have been on Old 60 in town. I mean, sometimes I think you could come up through Huntington more peacefuler than you could be on the interstate. But, there again, it's our mindset. If you start being dissatisfied and not content with where you're at, then you start picking and complaining, and the more you pick and complain, you start getting discouraged, aggravated, and then it'll end up leading to defeat. But the first place I was going to turn was Philippians 4:11. Like I said, these is common, great scripture that we probably all know, and from the way my Bible was wore in from Acts really, but from Corinthians over to this certain spot, it looked like I must have stayed here quite a bit. And I got Strong's out and looked and studied and wrote stuff down, and flopped open my Bible. And when I got my Bible flopped open to 4:11, I had Romans 8 verses wrote down here, got Corinthians wrote down here, had Timothy 6:5-8, which I'm going over too, but I done had all my references wrote down in my Bible that I looked up. So at least I was still on the same page. I thought I got kind of tickled at that. I looked everything up, and I thought, well, for it to have been that many years since I've studied, I'm still going the right way. But Paul, we know all the things that he went through, and we could go over and read a list there in the Corinthians about how that he was making a point to them, because there was a lot of trouble in the Corinth church, but how that he was in beatings more often and perils more often, and how that he done all that. He had the right to brag if anybody did, but he didn't. 4:11, he said, I speak that not in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, I know how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. And that's a big step for us to learn, and I think a lot of times maybe that if it's easier to be more contented when we're in a base situation. That sounds a little bit weird, but if we're abased, I don't want to say, I don't know how to really put this, not really prospering, enough money or bills paid and suffice. But if we're abounding, if something happens, we get a hold of extra money, an extra time. I think it's harder for us to be content in them times than it is when we're abased. You know, I mean, if you're living on a fixed income, got your work, you know what your money's going to be, bills is paid, everything's going good, nothing real extra, you know, you're kind of stay right there, satisfied, nothing, no big deal. But something happens that you get a hold of extra little money, you sell something, do this or whatever, however you get a hold of it, then you'll start looking for some way to spend it, you know, instead of saving it. It seems like sometimes the more, and I'll end up talking about the rich and money here in just a little bit, but, you know, the more that we have, the more that we want, far as this world's lifestyle. And it's, I guess what I'm trying to say, if you ain't got it, it's easier to not have it. But it's like being in a place of authority at your job, being promoted to supervisor or whatever. I've seen people that's been humble and good folks to get along with until they get promoted to a supervision spot. And then just as soon as they climb the ladder, their attitude completely changes, you know, on how that they're handling everything. As far as the way that they just talk to their coworkers or whatever, you know, they get this mentality about them that, you know, that they used to have trouble, you know, they're happy just to be able to point or bark orders, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You know, when that's not contentment, you know, that's greed. But and I've thought about how to explain this, and thought I had it worked out, but I'm stuttering a little bit about it. There's a difference between wanting to better yourself, you know, whether or not you're working for a promotion, you know, you're looking to get through your job, if you're playing sports, as far as that goes. I mean, same difference. There's nothing wrong with anybody playing to be the best basketball player they could be, or them kids roping. You know, there's nothing wrong with if you're going to go to rodeos and rope steers and stuff and be a steer wrestler, whatever you're going to do. There's nothing wrong with trying to do the best and constantly gain. But there's a danger of letting the greed get in our way to where that's all that we want. You know, and when we get that kind of attitude, then we lose our contentment again, you know, which, you know, well, I want to do this, and that. And then we don't ever stop and look what God's done brought us through, or how far, you know, what he's done gave us. But Paul said he knew both how to be content, whether or not he was, you know, Lord, if he was abounding, if he had plenty and everything was flourishing, or if he had little and he was suffering need. He didn't let what was going on around him affect his relationship with Christ. One of Paul's major things is he was trying to get to Rome. And it took him just about his whole ministry, you know, before he ever got to Rome. He wanted to go to Rome, and then his first missionary journey, no, and I ain't going to go through it, but you can follow him, or Ron likes maps. You can turn back most of your Bibles and got the missionary journey marked out in the maps. Well, the Lord was sending him all over the country, but he never did make it to Rome. He still wanted to go to Rome right up until he made it there, but he was content in doing what the Lord asked him to do and spreading his gospel with people. Didn't matter where he was at, what country he was at. You know, just like when he got shipwrecked, he washed up on the sea and he went through all this, and then they built a fire and was getting all dried out, and you remember the viper latched on his arm, you know. And then he slung it off, and the people went from thinking that they just wishy-washy, you know. They went from thinking he was a good man to something evil, to back, you know, when he shook it, when the serpent bit him, they thought, well, he's done something wrong, he's sinned. And then when he shook it off and it didn't bother him, then they thought, well, he's some kind of God, he's some, you know, and that's the way that the people do. But whatever Paul went through, you know, the contentment, the peace of God was in his heart. And if I was going to put my own definition to contentment, that's what I would take a little bit of what Strong says here, and I'd take a little bit of what I feel in my heart, you know, to avail. And I underlined it and I wrote the definitions down. You know, that's contentment that comes from God. You know, it's anything we look to in this world is temporal. Just like I said, you get a job, new job, boy, I love it. Well, 6 months into it, I wish this was different. I wish that was different. Yeah, new car, new house, where you live, without God being front and center in our life and letting Him give us our peace and contentment. It's all vanity, as the preacher says over in Ecclesiastes. You know, I mean, that's the things that Solomon wrote about there. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with them things of the world, but the matter of getting to a point that you're looking for all of them things for your happiness and for your peace and for your joy, that you let it rob what you done have. Over in Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 8, it said, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content." I'm going to go ahead and read the next one here. That way, verse 9, it said, "But they that be rich fall into temptation and snares, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition." There's nothing wrong with having a prosperous life, nothing wrong with money here on this earth, don't get me wrong. As Ron says all the time, you know, about tithing and stuff, we should honor Him with our money, but the whole picture of the rich would be, for us to get a picture of what has happened in the world today, would be look at Los Angeles. The movie stars, the football players, the basketball players, all of that anymore, you know, that make millions and millions and millions playing games, and then very opinionated in the news and society and don't have no morals or nothing to go with it. But, I mean, and I'm not picking on Los Angeles, because I was out there just about every other week for 10 years, you know. I feel like New York may be a little bit, well, I mean, I don't know, it's just bad. But I'm not picking on the cities herself. I mean, there's good people out there, and I enjoyed the country. But far as what's portrayed on TV, what the news and shows, very seldom do they ever go to a good part of the community out in L.A. that, like where we unloaded and loaded. I mean, the neighborhood is as clean as could be. You slept on the street. You know, the truck, you just pulled over and by the curb, just like, and set the brakes and go to sleep. I've felt safer in some of them neighborhoods than I have around here, especially in St. Louis and different spots like that. But, you know, I'm not saying that there's not good out there, but if you turn on the news, the first thing you usually see with L.A., New York, or Las Vegas is sin. You know, parties, money, the rich, the bigger, the richer they get, the bigger parties they have, the more sin that's involved. That's the danger with anybody being rich. You know, the guy I work for, I'd say if you went through and the company that he's got, ain't no doubt in my mind that he's rich. You go over and talk to him, and he reconfirmed it Friday when I went over and picked my check up. He was talking. He said, "I'm a Christian first, I'm a father second, and I run a business third." You know, and this contentment deal, I think, you know, like Ron's talking about, you know, when he preaches it for himself, you know, I may need to be reminded of that, but I mean, and kind of hit me a little bit more harder this morning thinking about it. That's a blessing to be able to stand and talk to your boss and him have that kind of attitude. And I've heard him say it different times, and that's truth. You know, he's a Christian first, a father second, and then runs that business third. It just, I need to thank the Lord more of it, you know, and when I start getting discontented. But that's a big statement. But you know, he dresses like we do. You can't tell that he's got no money, but that's his attitude. I mean, and I've spent a fortune, and it ain't about the every nickel, and I'm not telling this to try to brag or nothing like that, but just trying to make a point. I've spent probably on average of $2,500 a day. Every day I've been up there and worked. Spent out just on parts. That's not counting our labor. It ain't counting the other 14 guys up there. It ain't counting none of the health and welfare, the benefits. You know, that's what he chose to do with his money and his lifestyle. He got guys that's been with him for 15, 20 years that he makes sure that they got a job all winter long. Don't matter if they got nothing coming in or paying. We can choose how we have our money and stuff. It ain't nothing about getting. I kind of got sidetracked and I got talking about him. I chasing rabbits, as Leroy used to say. There's nothing wrong with being rich and having money, but it's most human people and how we handle it. It's the contentment deal and being rich. You remember, I think, looked it up, and I had to quit. I've had 45 places, and I thought, well, I'll never get to all them. I won't say rich young ruler, but he wasn't a rich young ruler, but the one that had great crops, and I asked him what he was going to do. I'm just paraphrasing here. I should have looked it up. But he said he was going to tear down his barns and build new barns. And they said, "Thou fool, tonight thy life will be required of thee." He wasn't content in his situation. If he would have been content in his heart, he'd said, well, my barn's is full, I got enough. He could have given the rest of it away. Or even he could have made a business proposition and probably sold it back in, whatever, however. But you see the greed that showed up in his heart, that he wasn't worried about what he done had, because he was going to tear it down and destroy it so that he could build bigger. And if we ain't careful, we get that way in our life. Maybe not to that extent. And I'm breaking this, right on down to everyday living. Don't matter if it's the outfit that you're wearing, the shoes you're wearing, or whatever decision you make in your life. Next time you get ready to, so I need this, stop and think. Are you content with what you have most of the time? And shoes wear out. Don't get me wrong, I got a new pair of boots on my feet. I'm not saying this, but just for a silly example, really, but it breaks it down to our everyday living and the way we think. Well, the sole's a little bit loose on this, I need to get me a new pair of boots. And I need a new pair of boots, or did I see somebody come on the job that had a new pair of boots and I thought, I like him. It's just about a matter of weighing out, and then there's nothing wrong if you got 3 or 4 pair of boots or 100. She didn't even look up out there, but Lori. And but it don't matter, a lot of this stuff is kind of silly, but it's just a matter of something for you to catch yourself. Because for the most part, it's like your relationship. Me and Amy went through a lot of trouble. Everybody knows in the past, but that's how most affairs and stuff start. If you get aggravated, mad at your partner, instead of going to them, talking about it, praying through it, asking God, what does anybody's first thing they do? They lose contentment. Either, well, that person didn't give me enough enough attention. Well, that places a seed of doubt in anybody's mind. They're not happy. Well, I'm not content in my relationship no more. Well, it goes a little bit farther. They start getting discouraged. Well, I'm tired of not being able to do this. I'm tired of not being enough. The next thing you know, they're looking for somebody else to give them attention, and then it ends up in defeat. But Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, and this is why that we should be able to live a good, content life with what we have. I know I just read talking about if we had food and raiment and clothes, that's enough to be content with, and it is. But we lived 2,000 years after they did. The lifestyle back then was a whole lot different than it is now. Just the whole issue of vehicles, money. There was more money in circulation back then than they are now, actually. But like the taxes and everything's been around. Mary and Joseph was on their way to go pay their taxes when Christ was born. It ain't like any of that stuff that we do is new under the sun, but it's changed. The times has changed. They didn't have to worry about giving $25,000 for a vehicle. They got up and made them a pair of sandals and walked basically everywhere they went. They didn't have hardly the hustle and bustle every day that we do now, far as just the way the society is, everything's moving so fast. You know, I mean, it's a rat race. You know, so, you know, even back in 1700s, 1800s here in this country, I could see where it would been easier to be content then than it is now, or the early 1900s. I mean, basically, if you got up, you raised, you had a garden, you farmed. If you had enough food to eat and stuff, you raised everything you done. The whole family was kind of self-sufficient, which, you know, one of the definitions was self-complacent. You know, everybody was more content if they had a piece of ground, the family and everybody stayed around. It was just a little bit easier lifestyle being content. To us, we think, well, we didn't have no electric, had to use a commode outside, no running water, an old stove, like froze to death in the winter. I don't know how you think it would be content, but they didn't know the luxuries. You know, they didn't know none of this other stuff to be comparing it with. You know, and it was, I think the family stayed a lot closer too in the overall picture then as well. But Hebrews chapter 13 verse 5, it says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear what man shall do unto me. You know, them two verses right there, if you don't draw away nothing else, and I'm going to end up in Romans chapter 8 to close out, just because it's a lot of promises I've not thought about. I mean, we know these scriptures and we've heard them, but, you know, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things. In the second half of verse 5, where it says, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. You know, in all reality, that right there should be enough for us to be content with whatever circumstance that we have, whether or not, and I'm speaking this a little bit lightly because I've not faced no sickness, no terminal health-wise and cancer and some of the things like that. That's the only thing I know to point anybody to hold on to through it, you know, because whatever else you look toward is temporal, you know, and even our loved ones, you know, you may be married. I did remember, I think that Wes and Bernie married, 50, 60 years? I can't remember now. You know, all the old timers that used to go to this church that I loved and grew up with, I still think about regular. You know, even that, they had a blessed, wonderful life together, but there comes a time of death and separation, you know. And in that time, you have to have the Lord. He said he'd never leave us nor forsake us. You know, once we're saved, born again, and he indwells us, we can turn down the wrong road, we can sin, we can get in a backslid situation where we're not reaping his blessings and we're not living the best life that he wants for us. But he never left us, he never forsake us, you know. I mean, all I had to do was turn back to him and fix the sin, repent. But, you know, he's there with us. Man will fail us, even if, like I said, your spouse, whatever, down through life, even if there's no failures there, no fighting or arguing, one day death is going to come, and you're going to be separated from that person, you know. And in that moment in time, all that you can do is hang on to the Lord. Romans chapter 8, starting about verse 31. My ideal this morning is I was going to went through and give you the definitions and explain the way contentment works in this world, and then I was just going to kind of give you these verses here for encouragement and reason for you to hang on to. You know, when things is down and out, you know, you may be your job, something may happen, may get fired, may be unemployment, it may be sickness, it may be some kind of disease, some kind of battle or trouble that you don't have no control over, you know, these verses will pull you through. But in the same sense, like I said about Paul, he knew how to be content when he was abounding too. When God does bless us and we are abounding, we ought to be hanging on to these same verses just the same when we're doing good as we are when we ain't. You know, and I think sometimes it's easy to do. We pray regular, Lord bless me, I don't know what you want me to do, I need help, I need guidance, Lord bless me, you know, for maybe months. Well, just as soon as he blesses and opens a door in her life, then our prayer life kind of slows down. I thought about that this morning on the way up her prayer request. I hadn't mentioned nobody up there at Regroup or none of the people battling addictions and mental trouble and stuff, and I was faithful in praying for them for a long time. You know, and still should be. I shouldn't have quit. But, you know, it's us as human, it's easy for us to try to, and I've heard people say use God as a spare tire, and that's kind of, I'm going to use that illustration too. You know, we're looking to him when things are not going good or not going the way we want it, but just as soon as he starts blessing and everything, it's easy for us to just kind of drive off and forget. But these verses don't change. You know, I mean, he's our Savior on the good days and on the bad days. And if he's going to bless us and take care of us, and then Hebrews chapter 4 there when it talks about us having a great high priest, you know, where we can come boldly to the throne of grace to obtain mercy in time of need. If we got a Savior like that, how much more should we do for him when things is abounding? You know, knowing that verse right there, I mean, that's the contentment and peace inside, and it goes right with joy. And it ain't got a thing in the world to do with being happy or having a smile on your face. But, you know, being content, being satisfied, knowing you're going to avail, that you're going to overcome it through and by Christ, not by ourselves. But anyway, I want to read this and I'll get out of the way. Romans chapter 8, going to start about verse 31. You know, I mean, if you're feeling down and out, discouraged, not happy with life, discontented about anything, I don't have enough sense to explain it, but I know like Rick's in Texas. He's content with the job and what's going on. Is he happy that he's 1,200 miles away from home right now and not been able to make it in when he wanted to? No, he ain't. I don't know. I done talked to him. But when you start getting that way, people start getting on your nerves. Everybody he looks at's on his last nerve just about. You know, I mean, that's but he's still satisfied. He's with the job. The job is sufficing all these needs. You know, he may not be the jolly pirate walking around with a smile on his face as he could be, but there's a difference between that. But Romans chapter 8, verse 31, it said, "What shall we say then to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for all. How shall he not with him also freely give us all things?" You know, I mean, you can go back over to Romans or Philippians 4:13. It says, "I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me." There's too many times that it's mentioned about him also freely giving us all things. You know, there's nothing wrong for us having things in this life down here and working to have good things, nice things. You know, I mean, so I don't want to make for sure that, you know, I don't want you to think that I think anybody's got to suffer, that he don't want us to prosper. He does, but we need to be content with what he's given us therein. It said, "Who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifieth. Who is it that condemneth? It is Christ that died, yea, rather, that is risen, who is even at the right hand of God, who is making intercession for us." That verse there, that's why we can be content. "For who shall separate us from the love of Christ? shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword. As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, and are counted as sheep for the slaughter. Nay, in all things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angel, nor principality, nor power, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Jesus Christ our Lord. So, them's kind of the highlights in a way. I mean, great big swelling verses that get quoted a lot sometimes, but we need them. That's where our contentment comes from, knowing don't matter what happens, what we go through, and the thing about it is our God, even self-inflicted ones, biggest part of my troubles in my life have been self-inflicted. It's been stuff that bad decisions, bad choices, but he's still there. It didn't separate him, from me. And he didn't leave me, he didn't forsake me. And that there is that's where our contentment and peace and joy lies, is in him and what he done for us, not us what we've done for him.